Greetings and welcome to another Unity tutorial video. In this video I'm going to cover how to set up a button to trigger a progress bar and add a number to a text label. Truly exciting stuff. Again, as with most of my videos, this is geared towards my classes, specifically the incremental game project. But even if you're not part of the class, more than welcome to listen in and see if you can pick up a tip or two. Alright, so I've got a couple of packages preloaded in that will be important for following along with this. I have, under the standard asset packages, I have environment added in for some visual fluff a little bit later on. And pretty much required, the prototyping package specifically for one of the color swatches in there. And we'll get to that in a bit. A non-standard package that I have added in, again for a little bit of visual fluff and juicing up this at the end, is the Necromancer Gui Package, which can be it's a free package that can be downloaded off of the asset store. So what is our goal? Now, like I said, we want to have a button that the user is going to click. There will be a progress bar above that button that will slowly fill up over time. And then once that progress bar has filled up, we are going to have a text on the screen update and increment by 1. This is a fairly simple common thing that you might do in an incremental style game. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty much wholesale ripping this off of Adventure Capitalist as far as the UI interaction type of stuff goes. So first things first, I want to set up my game window here. So make sure on the game window, and I want to talk about this free aspect thing here. In Unity, when you are setting up your UI elements, it depends a lot on anchors and scale and relative sizes, especially when you're using the screen space overlay mode for Canvas. Until you get a lot more experienced with the UI elements, I very strongly recommend making sure that you are not in free aspect and that you are instead in one of the common aspect ratio modes. If you want, you can specify specific screen resolutions, as I have done down here. You do that by clicking on the plus button, giving it a label, and specifying the width and height. Or if you have a custom aspect ratio that you want to set up, you can also do that as well. I'm going to use a 16:9 screen ratio for this demo because that turns out to be a 1920 by 1080 screen resolution, and that's a fairly common resolution for monitors nowadays, or at least that 16:9 ratio is, so I'm going to stick with that. Okay, hop back over to Scene and let's start getting some UI elements added in. You can do this by going to Game Object, UI, and then selecting the UI element you want. Or you can right-click in the hierarchy and go to UI and select the elements you want. I'm going to add in a button to start things off with. Now, the moment you add in a UI element, Unity is going to add in 2 additional things. One is a canvas. You must have a canvas in order for the UI system to be able to render correctly. There's a fair number of options here. I'll come back in a later video to go over these options. For now, leave the defaults alone. They'll serve us just fine. The other thing that it's going to add in is the event system, which handles all of the input stuff, dragging recognition, things like that. Again, there's a fair amount of stuff here, so I'll come back on a separate video to deal with these options. And of course, we have the button that we actually added in, which we can't see very well. Now, if you're using screen space overlay, which is the default, you will notice that UI elements are huge. Just to demonstrate this, I'm going to add in a cube. Make sure my cube is back at the origin like it's supposed to be. Zoom into my cube, and then proceed to start zooming out. Oh, there's my button. Yeah. The UI is huge. I'm going to delete that cube because I don't need it. That's just there's some technical reasons behind why it's doing it this way. It doesn't really impact you designing the UI other than just, it's usually more useful to double click on canvas to focus in on the canvas and then zoom in a little bit to work with your elements rather than getting carpal tunnel syndrome by abusing your scroll wheel on your mouse. The other thing, for when you're working with the UI system, and I'm already in this mode because I did a test run before recording, is you want to be in 2D mode. So you notice my 2D mode is on right now, because if you're in 3D mode, yeah, you can still do it, but it's also very difficult to get things perfectly lined up. Your view is going to be distorted because of the the perspective camera. Yeah, it's just really, you want to make sure you're in 2D mode, at least until you get really used to it, or you're doing something like in world space when you're working with UI elements. Okay, so I've got my button here, and I'm going to position it dead center. Now notice I've got this helpful, I can talk, I promise, helpful little locking system here. So once I get the button close to the center, kind of locks in, and if I gently twitch the mouse up and down, it's kind of hard to do, it's kind of sensitive, it doesn't get off that point. You will only get these locking helps if you have the 2D transform tool selected. If you are moving things around with the translation tool, the translation widget, you will not get those helpful little lock-ons. So you, generally speaking, want to be in the 2D transform tool when manipulating GUI elements. You do not want to use the scale tool. As a quick demonstration, if I use the 2D transform tool to make this button bigger, my text just simply stays in the center of the button. If instead I use the scale tool, my text gets distorted. Generally speaking, you do not want to mess with scale. You simply want to use the 2D transform tool and adjust your offsets as needed. So I'm going to center this button. And since I am centering this on the screen, I'm also going to want to make sure that my anchor point is in the center. There's actually a lot that goes on with these anchor points. There'll be a separate video on that, because honestly it's a little bit dry just going through and talking about all the different anchor points and manipulating them. So I'm going to anchor this to the center. And I can double check this to see these are offsets. As you can see here, by adjusting my offset, my button goes left and right. But nope, I want all my offsets at 0. And that gives me my button. Now I want to modify the text on this. So to do that, you need to expand the button, select the text element underneath it, because that's all the label is, really, and change it. I'm going to call this Harvest Wood. Now when you're entering in this text, don't hit enter, because that will cheerfully put in a new line, which is usually not what you want. Now you can't see that line because my button's not big enough. If I made it big enough, yep, there it is. I don't want that. So just click off when you are done. Okay, so that gets me my button. Now I want to have a bar set up. Now I could add in my image element straight off of canvas, but instead I'm going to add my image element. So right click on button and UI image. I'm going to add it in as a child of button. Now, ordering objects via the child-parent hierarchy is the primary way that you have for controlling draw order. The topmost parent is always drawn first, and then it walks down through the child tree, drawing children objects. So that means, of course, the parent is always on the bottom. Hence why the label on the text label here for the button appears on top of a button, because it's a child. Button gets drawn first, then the text. Also, when you have child elements here, its positioning and scale and anchor points are all relative to its parent object. So if I position this button, if I position this image with it being a child of the button, its positioning is relative to the button. So if I then select the button and move the button around, that little image panel comes along with it. Now this is going to be my background. So I'm going to call this progress bar background. You will notice that I almost never put spaces in my object names or UI names. That's a holdover from my DOS days in which spaces were evil, evil, evil things to be avoided at all costs. That actually does not matter in Unity. Put spaces in if that makes you more comfortable. I just, as a matter of instinct, don't, and honestly don't care enough to try to break myself of the habit. And then I'm going to zoom in here, although not so far that I lose track of my thing. And I'm going to, I want like a 10 pixel like border in. So this is 160. So I want a 5 pixel border on each side. So I'm going to make this width 150. Again, I'm going to take away that offset on the position X. And now I've got a button, and then maybe my background bar at least, and maybe I'll position it a little bit down closer. Okay. Now, this is my background color. So I could leave it white. I could change it to red and have the green bar fill up, but yeah, I'm just going to leave it. I'm just going to leave it white for now. Now I need another image bar that needs to be a child of this one, because I need to make sure it fills up the entire space. So I'm going to right-click UI Image, and now I'm going to mess with my anchor points. So far, I've been using anchor points as sort of like relative positioning. This time, I'm going to use my anchors to indicate relative size. So I want this child image to take up 100% of the area of its parent image. To do that, you might have to expand out your anchors. I'm going to set my mins to 0. I'm going to set my maxes to 1, because with the anchors, it has no idea what the size is, so it goes on a percentage system. 0 is 0%, 1 is 100%. So my 0 to 1 is basically 100%. And you can see my little anchor points here on the screen have changed now. My little points are at the corners of my parent image. Then I need to go back through and change all of my offsets to 0, and ta-da, it fills in, which is a little bit hard to see at the moment because they're both whites. So we need to change that. I want this top image here, or I guess I should say this child image, to be able to fill in. But there's no options to that effect at the moment. In order to have the fill-in option, you have to have an image. Otherwise, you're just modifying the color. So if I click on the circle tool here, I've got a variety of images. Now I could choose background. However, that has a couple of problems. The biggest is that, by the way, I just did a quick little shortcut there. Let me double click on canvas, zoom in. I want to show you guys something real quick. Since it just happened, it's a good thing to keep in mind. So I double click on canvas, I zoom in on the canvas. Use the mouse wheel, scroll in, and I want to get a little bit closer to this. And then of course now it's not completely doing it. Earlier, I couldn't zoom in this tightly because it was, I was losing track of it. It wouldn't let me do it. And so I had to re-zoom in on the button to fix that. So if you've got a situation where you're zooming in and all of a sudden the thing you're zooming in on just disappears, double click on the thing that you're trying to focus on to reorient the scene camera, the editor camera, and things will continue on. Okay, so zooming in tight here, you can see I've got a little bit of a problem in that, yeah, I can still see this area here. And I can't really, excuse me, I could go back and try and fix that here as well. Change that to a background. But then that kind of looks weird when I go to do the fill. Notice, ooh, the moment I do filled, oh, I get this ugly stretched thing. And yeah, this is not going to be pretty. So I'm going to go back here and fix this because I do not want that. I want that to be none. And yeah, especially now, once I change my image type to filled instead of sliced, that looks ugly. That is not going to be good at all. Even when you are prototyping, you have to avoid having things that are so visually ugly or visually distracting that it calls your attention to that thing rather than the prototype that, where you're trying to answer your question. And that needs to be fixed. And how I'm going to do that is, well, use a color. Now, normally what I do when I'm working is I have a variety of 1 pixel colors. Specifically, I have a 1 pixel white, a 1 pixel by 1 pixel white colored image. Because obviously if you stretch that, there's no distortion. It's a single color. And because it's white, you can use the color tint to make it whatever color you want. To avoid having to go into the whole thing of opening up GIMP and showing how to do that, instead, I am going to use prototyping assets. Going to materials here. Oops, not materials. Textures. As inside prototyping, you've got a bunch of these textures here that they use, of course, to create their various materials for doing the prototyping coloration and stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this orange one and I am going to change its texture type to Sprite, 2D, and UI. Apply. And now that this is a sprite instead of a texture, now I can come back over here to my image and I can either drag this in or click on the circle and select the swatch orange. Either way. Okay, now for the filled radial bit. We fill amount here. If I move this, you can see, oh, hey, look, that's pretty cool actually. Well, other than it looks really weird trying to do a radial fill on a rectangular thing. So instead, I'm going to change this to horizontal. Oh yeah, there we go. Progress bar. That is exactly what we need for a progress bar. Now, of course, I don't want my progress bar to start there. So I'm going to drag it all the way over. I'm going to leave just a little bit here so that way we have a visual reminder that, yeah, there's a progress bar here. But in all honesty, you probably should take it all the way off, before you actually showed people this. Okay, so we have our progress bar set up. We need one last little bit of UI, and then we can actually start adding some functionality to this. And that is we need a text box. So we're harvesting wood, so we need a label here for this to show how much wood we have. And this, I'm not going to make a child of this or anything. I'm going to have this free floating. So I'm going to go up to the canvas, nope, not rename the canvas. And I'm going to say UI text. And carefully drag it out of there. And I'm going to drag this up here into the corner. And now for this text, I think I'm going to go ahead and tell it best fit, so that way it fits in there nicely. And I'm going to say wood, colon, and then I'm going to change the size of this text box, so that way it fits pretty snugly around the text. Now I got to be careful, since I have best fit on, if I squeeze it in too much, it'll actually start adjusting the size on me. So there we go. That looks pretty good. And then I'm going to do another text box. So I'm just going to duplicate this one, move it over so it snaps. There we go. And then I'll replace that with a 0. Switch over to my game. Okay, that all looks nice and visible. So now we can actually start adding in some functionality. So dozens of ways of doing this. How I'm going to approach this is I'm going to create an empty game object to hold my logic script on the assumption that if this was going to be a fully featured game, I would need several game logic scripts. So that, and just, I don't know, organizational wise, I find it nice and neat to have a object in here called game logic that I know if I'm in a scene and I want to try to find my basic core game logic for the scene, well, you go to the game logic object. And even though it doesn't matter in the slightest, I'm going to reset you back to the origin. Okay, so I'm going to add a script onto here. So I'm going to add component, new script, and I am going to add in gathering. Obviously, name doesn't matter. Call it as you will. Just don't put a space in it. Remember, as I've mentioned in other videos, you cannot have spaces, or at least you can have spaces, but it causes severe headaches due to how Unity expects the file name and the class name to match, which is not standard C#. So you really are best not to put spaces in your scripts. All right, double click on that, open it up in Visual Studio, get it off of my other monitor so you can actually see what I'm doing here. Okay, so we've got a couple of things. And actually, as a matter of fact, I am going to flip things over like that real quick so we can see both screens. Window arrow key is a very nice little shortcut. And just so I've got some more space for my thing, I don't actually need any of those explorers. I'll just open up things through Unity. And let's rearrange my windows here a little bit. You get to see a sneak peek of all the junk I got on my desktop. Okay, so we have a couple of things that we need to grab here. Script-wise, we are going to need to know our button. We're going to need to know this foreground part, which actually I guess I should rename this to progress bar foreground, just to make it explicitly clear which is which. And we're going to have to modify this, which I'm going to go ahead and rename this to txt amount. I have an instinctive habit of putting txt in front of everything that's modifiable text. It's just an old habit, leftover habit for mine from working in VB programming and Windows Forms applet programming. So I'm going to need to grab this, I'm going to need to grab this, and I'm going to need to grab this. I need references to all of those things in order to do what I need to do. So since we've got a whole bunch of UI manipulation, I am going to put in a using Unity engine, I should say, if I can type correctly, .ui. Now I could use code to find and grab those references, but I find it easier and more logical most of the time to do this with the editor. So public, remember, if I want something visible in the editor, it's got to be public, or you have to use the compile modifiers on it, which for now, public. So public button, harvest button, public image, progress bar, and public text txt amount. Again, variable names do not matter. Just make sure you are consistent with them. Now, another thing that I'm going to need is, when we think about this, well, how long do I actually want this bar to take? So we're going to need a time for that. Also, we need to think about, now, do I want to come into code every time I want to change this value, save it, go back to Unity, twiddle my thumbs, and wait for it to recompile? Or do I just want to change the darn number and see the result immediately? I don't know about you guys, but the latter sounds like the better option to me. So I'm going to put in a public float work time. I'm going to set a default value equal to 2. And then that's pretty much it for the publicly available stuff. Now, there's a few other things that we are going to need to know. We need to know when and when not to fill up that progress bar. So that's a yes or no type question. So I'm going to put in bool do progress. I'm going to set the default value for that to false. That's something that's going to be controlled purely by code, so that does not need to be visible in the editor. In fact, should not be visible in the editor. I'm going to need to know how much time has elapsed since the player pushed the button, because I'm going to need that to calculate my fill percentage. So float elapsed time, and I'll make sure that is set to a default of 0. Okay, so let's start in on our logic. We'll do the fill logic first, then we'll put in the button click. So the first question, every update frame, I'm going to need to ask the question, should I do my progress bar thing? So since I'm asking a question, I will say if do progress, because since that's a Boolean, it's true or false. There's no equation there. It's just if do progress. That's either going to be true or false. Now, just as an organizational thing, I'm going to put a little comment here because I'm going to have some nested if statements in here. Generally speaking, when I start getting a whole bunch of curly braces, I like putting notes on them just to help me keep things straight. And then the first question I'm going to ask is, well, should I stop doing the progress? I know I said I should do it, but did I really mean that? Should I stop? In other words, has my elapsed time gone past my work time? So I'm going to say if, again, because I'm asking a question, if my elapsed time is greater than or equal to my work time. Now, the one thing I don't want to do on this is I don't want to say that. I don't want to say if elapsed time is equal to work time, because of the odds of two floats equaling their values exactly is so dang small that I'm pretty sure we could run this program for a very, very long time before we saw that happen. Like years long time. So remember, whenever you're comparing floats, you either have to check for a delta tolerance between them, or, if you can, say just greater than or equal to. So, if my elapsed time has gone past my work time, well, that means a couple of things. First things first, that means, I don't do my progress anymore, so do progress false. Next, I need to reset my fill amount, because if I don't, I'm going to leave a full progress bar just sitting there, and that's going to look kind of ugly and unprofessional. So I'm going to say progress bar dot fill amount equals 0 to reset that. And there's actually one other piece of logic that we're going to set here, but I'm going to hold off on that for the moment because I want to show exactly why we're going to be doing that. So that's all I really need to do for the moment when I need to stop. But if my elapsed time hasn't progressed past, else, so if my first question is false, okay, ask my question, elapsed time is not greater than work time, okay, I need to then always do this. So elapsed, again, sorry, apologize for the coughing there. All right, so elapsed time, what I don't want to do for increasing my elapsed time is something like this. Oops, and F. I don't want to do this. Here what I'm saying is every single frame add in 0.01 to my elapsed time. So if I had a theoretical frame rate of 100 frames per second, well, then it would, that basically that's what I'm assuming. In 1 second, my elapsed time would be equal to 1. The problem with this is that assumption that I have 100 frames per second. I might have 60 frames per second. I might have 90 frames per second. I might have some really weird frames per second. You don't want to do this. You do not want to make your timing frame rate dependent because that will come back to bite you very hard. Instead, what you need to do is use time.delta time. That is a unity built-in value that gives you the in seconds, which usually means a fraction of a second, since your last time you called update. So time.delta time. And then I need to set my fill rate. So progress bar dot fill amount. Did I say fill rate? Fill amount is what I meant to say. It's equal to elapsed time divided by work time. Because it makes sense. That's elapsed time as it increases is going to give me a percentage of how close I am to my work time. Once my elapsed time is equal to or greater than work time, that will be 1 or greater. The nice thing about fill amount is if I say fill amount equals 2, that won't hurt anything. It'll just automatically truncate that back down to 1. All right, so that's my logic. Now let's actually get our button in, because our button's fairly simple. Remember, since this has to be visible outside of this script, it needs to be public. Buttons don't return anything. And for the moment, we don't need to be worrying about parameter lists, so empty parameter list. So our button has been clicked. Well, what do we need to do? We need to make sure that everything is set up and ready. So our elapsed time, we need to make sure that our elapsed time is equal to 0. And now I sometimes tend to be very paranoid with my values. So I'm not going to assume that my fill amount is correct. So I'm going to say progress bar dot fill amount equals 0, even though I really cannot comprehend a scenario in which this would not be true. I also need to flag the fact that, yes, I should start doing my progress bar stuff now. So do progress is equal to true. That is it for our code, at least for the moment. So we can come back over to Unity, and now we have to hook all of this up. It's a very common thing I have found, especially when you're starting, and heck, I still do this from time to time, is you're so into wanting to test your code, you save it, you hop over, wait for it to compile, hit the run button, start clicking the button, and wonder why nothing's working. Yeah, it's because you forgot to hook everything up. So I'm going to go into the button. And buttons operate on basically giving them a list of functions to call when they get clicked. This list has no practical limit. I would advise against doing more than one thing per button. Yeah, maybe 2 or 3 if it's something really complex, but yeah, don't be adding in like 15 different function calls on a single button click. That's probably not a good idea. So I'm going to click on the plus sign here. Runtime versus editor and runtime is something we will come back to at a later date. Now, object. You have to add in an object. What you do not want to do, and it's a common first-time mistake, is you go, oh, well, my code is in this script file, so I'll drag this script file in here and call my function. No, as you can see, that doesn't do me very much. That doesn't do much for me. What you need to do, what it expects right here, is a game object that is, of course, since I'm saying game object, that means it's in your hierarchy, because that is the only place a game object can be, that has your script file attached to it. So game logic is what I have. So I'm going to drag that over, or I could click on the circle and select game logic. Now I need to make sure I change this no function. Another common mistake is to set the game object, but then forget to set the function. So I need to click on this no function, gathering, do harvest. Now that is set up, but I still have more things to set up. If I try and hit the run button right now, yeah, whoops, I'm getting no reference exceptions. Come here to my console. No reference exception. On line 44, if I look at that, that is where I'm trying to access my progress bar. Well, that's because if I come over here to my game logic, I haven't linked up anything yet. Oops. So I need to get those linked up. So button goes into the button link. The progress bar foreground goes into the progress bar link, and my text amount goes into my text link. Now everything is set up, so I can hit the play button, click on that, and it goes up. And apparently I have, wasn't paying attention. My anchor point was not set correctly on my text here, which unintentional error, but kind of glad I did that. That shows the importance of making sure you're paying attention to your anchor points. What happened is that these text objects, nope, not that text object, shrink you back down. Their anchor points are still set to the center, and these offsets are basically absolute values off of the center. So since my window is so small right now, that pushed them outside. What I should do, since I want these anchored in the top left corner, is I should change their anchor points to the top left. Let me zoom in here, make sure I'm getting these lined up correctly. Yep, there we go. And change his anchor point to the top left. So now, oops. Hold on, as I randomly click on things. Now, since these are anchored to this top left corner here, the screen size changing isn't going to mess them up. They'll still be, relatively speaking, offset from this corner here. All right, so got our button working, but this part isn't working. There's also another flaw in this. If I hit the play button and click on the button while the progress bar is going up, it resets. That's not good. So we have two things we need to do. We need to change it so that clicking on the button isn't possible more than during the progress bar going up, and we need to change it so that we increment this. So coming back over to my code, first I need a variable to track how much wood I have. So since this isn't something that has to be editable in the editor, I'm just going to put in an int wood amount, and of course that is going to start off at 0. When I am done, I need to increase my wood amount, and then I need to update that label. So txt amount dot text is equal to wood amount toString. I don't think the toString is strictly speaking necessary right there. I just like doing that. So that would fix that part of our problem. So if I hit the play button over here, click on the button, yay, I have 1 wood. Yay, I have 2 wood. Okay, but our problem of this is still going. For that, we're going to turn off the interactiveness of the button. Now, there's actually a couple different ways we could do this. We could disable the button. In other words, actually disable the script that's allowing it to be clicked on. But that won't give us a visual change. If I come over here to the button and I toggle this script on and off, that would prevent, if that script is disabled, you can't click on the button, but you also don't get any sort of visual feedback that the button can't be clicked on. Instead, there is an interactable property that we can toggle. And I'll show you how to do that in the code. So what we need to do over here, and this is why we have the button reference. So we'll say harvest button dot interactable equals false. Now notice we have some color coding over here. A disabled color, that's the color the button's going to change to when it's not interactable. And then of course when we are done, we need to turn our interactability back to true. Now if I run this, you can see it sort of grays out there, goes semi-transparent, and I can't click on it and interrupt it while it is running. Okay, so that video took a little bit longer than anticipated. Oops. So I'm going to leave it here. But, this is pretty plain. I mean, okay, yeah, prototypes aren't necessarily supposed to be works of art. I mean, everything's throwaway. You're trying to answer a question with a prototype. Well, this is pretty bland. This doesn't really help us visualize very well, is this going to work? And there's actually a few minor problems, specifically one minor problem with this UI, that we won't really be able to tell unless we add it into an actual environment. So the next video in this series is going to take a look at how we can visually spruce this up a little bit to help give a better feel. And so, until the next video, take care.